everyone, and this is BioPhoenix here, and Happy New Year everyone! So, as always, at the start of the year, we're going to be doing the games I beat in 2023, where I get to talk about all the games that I played for funsies on my own time. And I don't include the ones that I've reviewed on the channel because, well, I've already talked about them extensively, so there's no need for me to rehash everything here. But yes, I've done this a couple times for the past couple of years, and they're always really fun to do, so as always, let's get started. So the very first game that I beat in 2023 was actually a game that I played on a stream, and I beat it without realizing how short the game was, and that happens to be Kazekiri Ninja Action on the PC Engine CD. And it's a side-scrolling beat-em-up with some platforming elements. So yeah, like I already said, I beat the game in one sitting, and I have to say, this was actually a pretty good chill game to play. It's nothing super crazily amazing and mind-blowing, but I thought it was actually quite fun to play through. The gameplay kind of reminds me of a mixture between the Ninja Warriors and an old-school Castlevania-style game. And I remember the graphics in it being pretty impressive, and the music was pretty cool too, although I don't remember all of the music, but I do remember a couple of them were pretty cool sounding. So yeah, if you want something that's pretty easygoing and isn't too crazy hard, at least if you're not playing on hard difficulty, and if this sounds interesting to you, then I'd say it is worth checking out. But I'll tell you all right now, you will probably need to emulate this one because this is one of the most expensive and rare PC Engine CD games, and for a console that already has enough rare shit as it is, yeah, that's saying a lot. And the next game I happen to finish is Otogi 2 on the original Xbox. So before I talk about Otogi 2, around this time, I was also playing Otogi 1, and I got a pretty good chunk through it. But unfortunately, there was one mission in that game that was so annoyingly difficult that I just couldn't put up with it. But because I did like a lot of other things about the game, and I had the second one, I wanted to give it a try and see if I like it more. And given that I've beaten the game, yeah, I definitely like this one a lot more. But before we talk about what I liked about it more, let's talk a little bit about the game itself. So, it is a 3D hack and slash developed by FromSoft, and I can tell you all that Otogi 2 has become one of my favorite FromSoft games from the pre-Dark Souls era, right up there with Shadow Tower Abyss and Lost Kingdoms on the GameCube. And as you might be able to tell, the graphics in this game are really awesome looking, and I really love the art direction for the game. All the characters that you use in this one are really badass. And that's one thing that I really like about this game more, is that there are more characters that you can play as with their different movesets, and they're all really fun to use. Also, one mechanic in this game that is pretty interesting is that whenever you knock an enemy over and they go flying into a wall or into like a bunch of breakable objects, you can actually deal a lot more damage to the enemies. Not only is it really helpful to use your surrounding while you're fighting enemies, but it also just makes it more fun and amusing just to see their bodies go flying around all over the place. But the one thing I should warn you all about is that that mechanic is also a double-edged sword, where that the enemies can also do that to you too, so it is one of those things you do have to be extra careful about. Also, another thing I should bring up, and this is something that I know is either going to make and break it for some people, and even for someone like myself who hates time limits, this actually did not bother me, is that yes, this game sort of has a time limit, but it's not done in the way how you'd think it would be. So how it works is that you have a magic meter, and as every second goes down, the magic meter depletes. But the two good things I will say about this is that one, there is a lot of items around the areas that can gain up some magic, and there are some that can pause the magic meter from going down for a couple of seconds, so that definitely really helps out with a lot. And the other thing is that the level design in this game is done so well around this mechanic in this game that the levels are really short. So whenever you die, it doesn't feel like a chore to get back to where you were. Now, there is a couple parts in the first game that were pretty well designed around it, but there were some that were not. But as for this game, it was much more consistent about it, and I really liked it a lot. And there is even a story reason as to why the magic meter works the way that it does, is that all the characters that you play as are dead warriors that are being brought back to life from an unnatural magic that can't last forever. So at least they did give a good reason for it, unlike usual shit where it's just, oh no, the time runs out, everything's gonna implode for no reason. So yeah, with all this said, the game is pretty fair and is not completely bullshit hard. Like, I wouldn't say it's an easy game, but I definitely didn't think it was annoyingly hard or anything. I thought it was actually very fair and very fun to play through. And talking about this game really makes me want to replay the game all over again with different characters that I didn't use on other missions and such. So yeah, I actually really like this one a lot. Alright, and the next one that I finished is kind of a more goofier game. In fact, the game was released for free on April 1st, so it is an April Fool's Day game, and that was The Murder of Sonic the Hedgehog. Yeah, when I saw the little thing about this game, I thought it was really funny, and then it ended up being real, and then I was like, oh shit, I gotta try that out. So I ended up streaming the game, and I will say, streaming this game was a hell of a good time, even though my voice was pretty much dead by the end of it because I had to like do all the voices and shit. But I still had a good ass time, so yes. This is a visual novel that takes place on a train where the character Amy has a birthday party, and then what's ends up happening is that Sonic gets murdered, and then you're all trying to solve the crime of who murdered Sonic. And as you would expect from a concept like this, yeah, it's very hokey and corny, but I think you kinda had to go into it knowing that it is, and besides, most Sonic game stories are pretty ridiculous anyways, that they are kinda fun. And there's also a lot of fan service Easter eggs that you can find too that were actually quite interesting to find. So yeah, there's not a whole lot else I can say about it though, but for a game that was released for free, I liked it for what it was. I had a good time with it. And the next one we beat after that was a game on the NES, and that was Cowboy Kid. So this is one game that I've always remembered for having a weird box art where you got Burt Reynolds and Tatanka on a romantic paperback novel. I don't know, that's just the first thing that comes to my mind, so I always thought it was amusing. But yeah, this game was surprisingly pretty cool. I actually really liked this one. So this game kind of plays similar to a Goemon game or a Mystical Ninja on the SNES, where you fight a bunch of enemies on screen in a side-scrolling view, but you can go inside houses and buy items and like talk to people and all this kind of stuff. And yeah, it kind of has a little bit of some Zelda elements thrown in there, but it's not like open world exploration. Instead, you just gotta pick the boss that you want to fight, and then during his stage, you just gotta, you know, go through the stage, get all the items that you need, and then once you beat him, then you go to the next one. And yeah, I have to say, this game was pretty enjoyable. It wasn't stupidly hard, although there were some parts that were a little bit tough to get through, but it wasn't, like, ridiculously impossible. And there were some pretty catchy songs throughout the game too, which I liked. So yeah, when I did my top 30 favorite NES game recommendations, I think I mentioned this one as an honorable mention, and well, yeah, I would say it is a really well-worthy honorable mention for that. I don't think it's a game that a lot of people talk about outside of it being kind of a rare game, but honestly, yeah, I like this one. I don't know if I'd say I like it better than Mystical Ninja, but I think it is a pretty good alternative, especially for back in the day when we barely got any of the Goemon games. I don't think we got any of the NES ones if I remember right. And now, as for the next game that I beat, and this one might surprise some people, but for the very first time, I completed Fatal Frame 1. Yeah, especially as I am a big Fatal Frame fan, for some whatever reason, I never got around to playing the first one, until recently. So I don't think I really need to go into like what the series is about, as I do feel like it is pretty well known enough. Even if you've never played the games, you at least know what the concept is about, where you capture ghosts with a camera. So yeah, it was pretty interesting playing the first game after all these years of playing all the sequels, like number 2, 3, and 5. Unfortunately, I still haven't played 4 yet, but I will eventually. So yeah, even though I've played like all these random sequels without playing the first one and finally going back to it, I gotta say, I was actually pretty impressed how well this game held up. Not only do the graphics look really great for a pretty early PS2 game, but the controls and the basic mechanics still worked really good and didn't feel clunky at all. If anything, I actually found that the action scenes in this game were much more faster than the usual ones, almost to a point where it actually made it a bit more challenging, but it was actually really fun. And I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that say that their favorite game in the series is the first one because of the fact that the game is just so much faster than the other ones. Also, the atmosphere in this game is just top-notch stuff, which is not really surprising given that all the games have some really good atmosphere, but I do think this one and the second one are probably some of the best. So yeah, it's a great game that I'm actually glad that I finally was able to get around to, and yeah, it's a great start to a series, and it still holds up very well. But the last thing I'll mention that I thought was really funny about the game was that there's some notes in the game that you can pick up and read, and they all have names for them, but there is one note in particular that is called the Death Note. Yes, I'm not even kidding, but remember though, this came out before the anime. And the next one that it completed happens to be a game on the Nintendo Switch, and that is Remelia Scarlet Symphony. So this is a game that was based around the Touhou franchise, which I'm not going to get into the whole origin of that because that would take forever, but to sum up this game is that it's pretty much a classic style Castlevania game, and you play as Reimu, the Red Shrine Maiden. And this game looks very edgy, especially with the box art here. But yes, this is actually a very cool looking game, has some nice graphics. The music is really awesome, as you would expect, because most Touhou games have some really killer soundtracks. But unfortunately, I did find this game to be a little bit underwhelming. It wasn't bad, like it was a decent game, but it definitely could have been so much more. The gameplay itself is fine, and feel pretty good, doesn't have bad controls or anything like that at all. I think the problem with this game was that some of the levels kind of recycled a bit. Sometimes you'd go into a room, and then it would just look a certain way. Then you go to the next room, and it literally looks like the room that you just exited out of, but only that maybe it has, different enemy placements. So, it has a lot of repeated level designs, and it does get a little bit repetitive. Also, this game is really damn short. I was able to beat this game in one sitting on my first time playing through it, and I was like, wow, that's the whole game? Not that I have a problem with short games, but for the price that the game cost, I felt like it was just way too short for what it is, so in case this game does look interesting to you, just wait for a sale, because I don't think this game is worth $30. But if you can get it for less than $10 somehow, then I'd say it'd be somewhat worth it, but as again, I do feel like there are other Touhou games out there that are much better, like Touhou Luna Nights. Now that game is one of my favorite Touhou games that have come out in recent years, and I love it a whole lot, and I can recommend it to way more people, plus I'm pretty sure it's a lot cheaper too, and has gone on sale, quite a lot. So that one, I do think is worth checking out, where this one, I would say, if it's really cheap, it's not bad, but it could be a lot better. And next up we have is a sequel game that I've been wanting to play for quite some time, and that happens to be No More Heroes 2. And yes, I'm slowly catching up to the series, and yes, before anyone mentions it, yes, I know, I'm gonna play Travis Straits again before jumping to 3. I know this shit. But yeah, No More Heroes 2 was a very interesting one for many things. For that, one, I actually found that No More Heroes 2, on most aspects, I thought was more enjoyable to play through. Because in the first No More Heroes, it had the open world aspect, and you had to do a bunch of missions and side quests to be able to buy the next mission, so you couldn't do the missions right away, you had to do a bunch of grinding for it, and I felt like it made the game kinda dragged out a bit. Where in this game, you don't gotta worry about any of that, you can just go to the next mission whenever you want. But there is no open world in the game, you're just selecting through a menu and it just takes you to wherever, so I do feel like that the first game was a bit more of an ambitious project that was actually very experimental and interesting, but unfortunately with the second one, it doesn't have any of that kind of stuff to it, so it's kind of a weird thing where that, yeah, the first game may have made the game a lot longer with a lot of padding you had to do, but it had a lot of interesting aspects that were very impressive for the Wii, and then the second game kind of took all of that out, but yet it felt more of a breeze to play through, so it's kind of weird how it all goes like that. I guess it just depends on what type of games you like better, open world or linear. Personally, I'm usually more about the linear stuff, just because I don't think just because something is bigger doesn't mean it's better. But I still like the first game, and I still think it is very well respected for what it is. It's just, I don't know, there's just some things about the number 2 that I like a little bit more, but I still think you can't go wrong with either of them, for that they are just very fun and funny. Also, the 2 new mini-games that they added into the second one I also really like too, such as the Mach Rider one on NES, where you're riding on a motorcycle delivering pizzas, and then there's the top-down puzzle game that you have to suck up bugs in a vacuum. I actually really like those 2 mini-games a lot. Also, last thing I'll mention is that I really love the ending theme of the second game a lot too, for that it's just a really cool sounding Enka song. In fact, I wasn't even expecting this game to have an Enka song in it at all. So yeah, hopefully I'll try and play through the other 2 later on and see where that goes, because even with just these 2, it's a very interesting series nonetheless. Alright, and the next game we got here is Steel Rising. This is a game that came out in 2022, and it is a Souls-like game, so, you know, very similar to Dark Souls. I don't need to go into all that, since you all know what that is. Now, I know I've been saying for the past little while that I've been kind of burnt out on those types of games because, you know, there's just so many cool ones that come out, and of course, they're the types of games that you really need to have a lot of patience for. But the reason why I wanted to play this one was that the setting was really fucking cool. It takes place in the 1700s in France, and it's all about a bunch of robots taking over, and the character you play as is literally a robot maid. So that's pretty cool over-the-top shit, and I love it. And one good thing that I can say about this game, in case the one complaint that a lot of people make about these kind of games, is that this game was actually really accessible and really easy. But not too easy, but easy enough that I do find it to be the most accessible Souls-like games that still manages to put a decent challenge and is just overall very, very fun. Like, messing around with all the different weapon builds you can get is just really fun. In fact, that's like one of the things I always loved about these kind of games. Also, the combat in this game is very smooth like Nioh, and doing the parry maneuvers is not a pain in the ass. And another good thing I do want to mention too about this game for it not being harder is that I feel like there's not as much enemy ambushes in this game, and even if you do happen to get ambushed by an enemy, it usually never does that much damage to you, so you're never gonna get like most of your health knocked out or fucking die in one hit from them unless you literally just sit there and do nothing while you're getting ambushed. And of course, the level design in this game is still really good looking, and of course I have to mention that this game is very beautiful looking with all the different details that it has going on, but yeah, outside of all the fancy stuff though, the level design itself is actually really damn good. So if you really like Souls-like games, but you're not great at them, but you always like the ideas of them, I think this is one you should at least give a try, for that not only does it just look really fucking cool and awesome, but it also is, like I said, a very accessible one that still manages to be good, because I know there are some Souls-like games that are easier, but they just don't feel good to play. But this is one that I can definitely say is good to play, at least for me. I don't know, maybe I do love this game more than a lot of people do, because I'm sure there are a lot of hardcore Souls fans that like don't like this game because it is too easy. But for me personally, as you already knows, that yeah, I don't think every game needs to be hard as shit to be good. And I also don't think it needs to be piss easy either. I feel like this game felt pretty well balanced enough that I think a lot of newcomers could enjoy it. But before we move on to the next game, one thing I should let you all know about Steel Rising if you do buy it on PC is that this game is pretty damn hefty and is not the most well optimized, so you do need a pretty good computer to play it. But once you do find your right settings that do work for your computer though, then you're good to go. Alright, now this next one is a fucking random ass one, and that happens to be Daikatana on the Game Boy Color. Yeah, this shit is a thing, and you know what's funny? This is probably the best version of the game. Yes, better than the N64 one, and better than the PC version, is the Game Boy Color one. Isn't that hilarious? So as you can tell, this is a top-down Zelda game and not a first-person shooter, which I do think is pretty interesting. And it kind of reminds me of a lot of times back in the day whenever you'd see a game that gets like a Game Boy version, you're like, how the hell did they put that on there? And then you play it and you realize, oh, it's not even like that genre at all. Yeah, this is one of those cases, and yes, this is the most functioning version of the game, and I can actually say it's pretty decent, though I wouldn't say it's nearly as good as the Zelda games that you can get on the Game Boy and Game Boy Color, but it's actually surprisingly solid. The only thing wrong with this game, from what I remember, was that the hit detection is not perfect. It does take a little bit of timing to get used to, but once you do get used to it though, it's actually not that bad, and I found it to be somewhat enjoyable. Like I said, it's nothing like crazy amazing, but I did find it to be quite fun once I got into the groove of it. So if you really had to play a version of Daikatana, go with this one. Alright, and next up we have here is Ys 3 on the PC Engine CD. So yep, I beat another Ys game, which I feel like I haven't done since Ys 9, I think was the last one that I beat. And as for this one, it's really fucking awesome. I really like this one a lot, and it is so much better than the Super Nintendo one. Because the SNES one is the only other one that I actually put like decent amount of time into, and unfortunately I didn't really like it as much. Like, it was okay, but yeah, it felt like the attacking in that game was very flimsy feeling. I don't know how to describe it, but it felt weird. But this version, however, the attacking feels really damn good. And the game was just really fun to like grind in the game. Yes, this is one of the few games where I can say that grinding was fun, mainly because the music in the background is just so amazing, which is not surprising, but that definitely helps with the grinding and being able to just blast through the game. Also, this game was not too insanely hard either. Now, sure, there are some parts that can be a little bit tricky and some bosses that can be tough if you don't know what you're doing, but for the most part, this is probably one of the easier, older style Ys games. Well, when I mean older style, I just mean the ones that are from back in the day, not so much the top-down ones where, you know, the bumping mechanic. And it's kind of interesting too, because Ys 3 back in the day was considered to be the black sheep of the series for that it changed the perspective of the game, kind of similar with Zelda 2. But yeah, I do think this is still a really damn good version of it that is well worth playing today. Alright, and next up here, we have another one that's been a long time coming for me, and that happens to be Famicom Detective Club Part 2. Now, before you ask, well, what about Part 1? Well, believe it or not, Part 2 actually takes place before the first game, so it is recommended to play the second one first. Of course, you don't have to do it that way, but I have heard from people that yes, number 1 can stand alone on itself, but there are definitely some connections between the two that you might not notice if you haven't played the second one. So anyways, with all that aside, this is one game I was always interested in trying ever since I saw that trophy in Super Smash Bros. Melee with the girl named Tachibana, where I used to think she was like a Sailor Moon character, which I was like, wow, they put Sailor Moon characters in the trophies? So yes, for a very long time, this game has been an interesting mystery to me, and now after finally playing it, I can say this game was pretty cool. I liked it. And for the record, the version that I played of this game was the Super Nintendo version that was fan-translated, because I know they came out with a newer one on the Switch, which is like another remake version, and I actually don't think the art style in that version looks bad. I think it looks fine, but weirdly enough, I still think the Super Nintendo version is my favorite for that. It has some really cool looking backgrounds, and of course all the character sprites are just very old school looking, which of course I'm a big fan of. And the fan translation has been around for a long time, and while I just always procrastinated on it, but now I finally completed it, and well, yeah, I think it was quite good. The story itself is pretty basic stuff, nothing super crazy, just, you know, some girl ends up getting murdered at a school and you just have to investigate a bunch of people, so yeah, that's pretty much the most I can say about that without going into spoilers. So knowing all this, don't go into this expecting it to be on the same level as 999 or AI Somnium Files or any of that crazy stuff. But for an old school visual novel, I actually thought it was pretty decent. And it did have some funny parts too, which I did find to be quite amusing and fun. But my only one complaint about this game, even for when it came out, is that this is one of those visual novel slash point and click type games where there's a lot of parts where you gotta like exhaust every single dialogue option over and over again, so it is one of those games where it does get a little bit tedious to get through certain parts of the game, but despite that though, I liked everything else about it enough. But I'm glad to say that I finally experienced it for that. It's been a long time coming for me, but I would like to play the first part eventually though. Alright, and now we're getting into spooky season with October, and there's only 2 of them here. So, the first one here happens to be Pocket Mirror, and this is a game that I thought looked really damn cool. So this is a horror game that is done in a top-down view style with some very beautiful 2D sprites, but it also does have some visual novel elements for that. There is quite a lot of dialogue within this game. And I do think that the story in this game was actually pretty cool, even though some parts were a little bit tough to wrap your head around, but once you kind of understood things, it was actually a pretty interesting story. Now, like I said about Famicom Detective Club, I wouldn't say it's like top tier storytelling, but I did found it to be pretty cool though. There's a lot of very interesting and trippy psychedelic places you get to go to and lots of weird things to interact with, and the music is really cool as well. And there was one part of the game that did actually startle me a little bit, which is pretty rare to happen for me when playing video games. But yeah, if there is one thing I do have to mention about this game is that if you do plan on playing through this game and you want to get the good ending, not only do you have to beat the game multiple times, but also you have to do some very specific tasks to do it, and it's kind of hard to figure out how to do it without looking up a guide, so that is something to keep in mind. But one thing I am looking forward to is that there is another game that came out that is related to this game called Little Goody Two Shoes. That also looks really interesting, so that'll be one that I will look out for in the future. But as for Pocket Mirror itself, though, yeah, I liked my time with it. I thought it was quite good. Although, unfortunately, I haven't really, talked much about the story, but as again, it's kind of hard to talk about the story with these games without going too much into detail, and while I do think this is one of those games that you really do have to play for yourself to really kind of get everything. Alright, and as for the next game that was also beaten in October, and this is a game that's also been a long time coming, for that it's a game I played a lot before, but then I lost my save file, and then I finally beat it, and I did it all on stream, and that was Painkiller Black Edition. Now this is a fucking awesome game to just run around, blow up the shit out of everything, and then leave. So in other words, this game is basically like Stone Cold Steve Austin. Arrive, raise hell, and leave. That's this game. And to make it even more badass, the game has a fantastic metal soundtrack, which I really love a whole lot. Unfortunately, no Painkiller from the band Judas Priest, but all the music in here is more than good enough. Even the stuff that are not metal, like the more ambient soundtracks, are also really damn good as well. Lots of very cool set pieces you get to go to, lots of very cool enemy variety, you even get to shoot at fucking ninjas for crying out loud. And yeah, this game is really fucking awesome. I'm glad to have finally beat it after all this time, because this was a game I remember a friend of mine had way back in the day, but I didn't actually play the game, I just watched him play it, and I remember the first time I saw the stake gun where you shoot an enemy and they get impaled to the wall, I thought that was one of the craziest things ever. And then years later, when I finally played it and used the stake gun, yeah, it's one of the most fun and creative weapons to use. So yeah, even for an old school FPS that, some might call dated, I actually find this one still holds up really damn well. Alright, not much left to go. So this next one right here is yet another visual novel, but this one also is one of my all-time favorites, and that is the AI Somnium Files Nirvana Initiative. So this is the second game, and I have to say, this second one is really damn good, just like the first one, and there are some things about it I do like a little bit better, but then there's two things that I don't like as much, but it doesn't really detract from the overall story. So as you would expect, this game does take place after the first game, and I do think it is recommended to play the first game first, obviously. Although there is a mode that you can play where it actually does kind of cover up things from the first game, so in case you wanted to play the second one first for whatever reason, but I still think the first one is worth playing just because it's just such a damn good game. So yeah, in case you don't know anything about this series at all, is that it's about, being a detective and you have to solve these, really crazy, brutal crimes. But the two things that does make this game a bit more interesting than the usual crime detective stories is that, one, you actually have the ability to go inside people's dreams to solve the crime, which is really cool. And there are some characters that have a eyeball within them, but it's a special eyeball that has its own artificial intelligence, and of course it has its own personality. And the character writing between the different characters and the different the AI ball kind of things, it's just so fucking great and I love it. And there's a lot of dumb funny shit that I just love a whole lot, and some really great serious stuff that is just very tragic. So yeah, I don't want to get too much into the story here, as I do think that this is a highly recommended game for me, and that it is well worth playing if you do want a really good detective story. But as for the two things that I mentioned that I don't like as much compared to the first game, is that, well, they're both kind of story related, although one of them I think I can talk about that isn't super spoilery, is that in this game, there is two main characters. One of the main characters is from the first game, and I actually really like that character a lot, I think they're awesome, and then the second character is a new one that was made for this game. And unfortunately, that newer character that they added, he's a pretty bland character that I was just not a fan of. Now, I didn't, despise him, I didn't think he was awful, but I just really didn't care for his character all that much, which is kinda sad for a game like this, because most of the other characters I think are great, and they have some really cool development and lots of interesting stuff to contribute. And then there are times where they try to make him funny by giving him, this, weird voice that he'll just randomly, blurt out, but every time he does it, it just gets kinda overused, and it even wasn't even that funny the first time, so yeah, that's just, one thing about this game that I just kind of wasn't the craziest fan of. But like I said, it wasn't annoying and it wasn't the worst thing ever, but compared to the main character of the first game, it's a far cry. But yeah, everything else about this game is still just as good as the first game, and the one thing I do like about this one better though, is that when it comes to the investigation scenes, there are time limits, just like the first one, but in this game, you can actually set the difficulty where the time limit is like almost unlimited. Okay, it's not really unlimited, it's just more so that like everything costs so little that you can pretty much fuck around as much as you want, so therefore you can actually experiment with interacting with things that you normally wouldn't have interacted with. And there's a lot of like really funny randomness to the game's like interactions, because there's a lot of funny stuff from the first game that you can easily miss, and if you do try to get them, then it's just gonna screw you over because it's like, oh no, you took up too much time, where in this game, you don't gotta worry about all that fucking shit. So yes, I would actually say that so far, both AI Sonian Files games are really damn great, and are just as great as each other. As much as I love the Zero Escape series, I still think that 999 is like the absolute best, and then the second one, Virtue's Last Reward, is really good, but I do think it isn't on the same level as 999 for me personally, but I still think it's a really good game. But I do find that AI Sonian Files 1 and 2 are pretty consistently tied for the most part. Alright, and 2 more left, and this is one game that actually did come out this year, and it's also one that was actually in that stupid video game awards, and that happens to be Resident Evil 4 Remake. And this was a game that a friend of mine gifted to me on my birthday, so that was very kind of him to do. But yes, I don't really need to say what the game's about, because, well, I think we already all know that already, but yes. I was one of those people who always said that Resident Evil 4 didn't really need a remake, because, you know, the game's already good enough as it is. Couldn't they just remake something that's like, you know, like Dino Crisis, or Haunting Ground, or, you know, something that hasn't been, like, done to death, you know? And even after playing this game and absolutely loving it, I still stand by the idea that, yeah, I don't think we absolutely needed a remake of Resident Evil 4, but the fact that they went out and did it anyway, it was actually pretty cool and a lot of fun just to see exactly, like, what things they changed and what things they, like, kept the same, and yeah, it was just very interesting. What I can compare this situation to is similar to the Hannibal series, the movies that is, with Silence of the Lambs, Red Dragon, and Hannibal, right? So the interesting thing about this is that the movie Red Dragon that came out in the early 2000s is actually a remake of a movie that came out in the 80s called Manhunter. Yeah, there's a reason why they changed the name, but I won't get into that here because that's for a whole other thing. But yes, they decided to remake a movie from the 80s and the early 2000s, so if you do the math, you realize that the movie's not even that old. And plus, a lot of people that knew about the original one actually really liked it and were pretty happy with it, so there was a lot of people that were kind of upset about them, like, remaking it because it's like, well, isn't that unnecessary? And yeah, we all know the reason why they did it was because they wanted to make another film with Anthony Hopkins as a Hannibal Lecter, and to make it more consistent with Silence of the Lambs. So yeah, despite the remake being unnecessary to remake, it's actually still a really damn good movie, and it doesn't make the original feel obsolete either, because there are still some things about the original that I like better. So yeah, that's the thing I gotta bring up with Resident Evil 4, is that I think that is the perfect comparison that I can think of, where yes, both of those things, yes, they didn't need it to get remade, but the fact that we got them was pretty cool, and I did really like a lot of the changes that they make, and I still think that it doesn't make the original Resident Evil 4 obsolete either. Because that is a game that is still timeless, and even though this new remake version, yes, does improve upon a lot of things, like obviously it has a nice fancy graphics, and it has a lot of more updated controls, but even playing that game with the tank controls, I still think it just feels really fun. And the remake, despite it being so much better in a lot of aspects, it'll never take away the funness from the original. So yeah, that's all I'm gonna say about comparing the two, because it seems like I've been yammering on about that more than anything. But I'll mention two things quickly about this new one, that I really like Ashley a lot in this one, as I feel like she's not nearly as annoying and is actually more likable as a character, and also the fight against Salazar was just really epic. So yeah, I'm still happy that I was actually able to play through this game, as I had a lot of fun with it, just like the first time I ever played Resident Evil on the GameCube when I rented it back then. And finally, as for the final game that I beat within 2023, is Neotopia on the PC Engine. And yes, we go from Resident Evil 4 Remake to this game that not a lot of people talk about. So this is a game I actually started a few months ago, but then I took a break from it because I wanted to work on a game review, and then I just kind of never went back to it until after I beat Resident Evil 4 Remake, because I was like, I should try to beat that game soon, because I almost got to the end of it, and then I did, and yes, this game was actually pretty cool. I liked it. Now, the story to the game is not, like, on the same level as your typical Zelda game. I mean, it's fine, it's whatever, but I do think that the worlds in it look cool, and I do like how in the compass in this game tells you where the dungeons are, which is very, very helpful, because later on in the game, there's a lot of, like, maze-like stuff that can get a little confusing if you didn't know what the compass did. A lot of the set pieces you get to go to look pretty cool, and I really like the music quite a lot in this game, especially in the sky zone and the water zone. I really like those ones a lot. And yeah, I thought it was actually a pretty decent Zelda clone on a system that not a lot of people had back in the day, because yes, this game did come out in English on the TurboGrafx 16, which, yeah, I mean, it's a cool name too, but I'm just so used to calling it the PC Engine at this point. But yeah, I might talk more about this one whenever I get around to doing my top 30 favorite PC Engine games, as I do plan on doing that still. It's just that I do have like 3 games I do want to try out and try to play through before I make some final decisions on it. But I can say for sure that Neotopia probably will be on there. Not entirely sure where, but well, I'll be the one to figure that out when we get there. But yes, I actually did like this game. It was quite fun. Now, before I end it today, I do have 2 quick things I do want to mention. The first thing is that there was another game I also started a couple months ago, and I did play through quite a bit of it, and I was really liking it, and I tried to beat it before New Year's, but unfortunately, it didn't make the cut. So hopefully sometime in 2024 I'll actually get through it, and then I can talk about it, but I'll leave it as a surprise. And the final thing I want to mention is that I usually don't mention fighting games in here just because I feel like there's just not really a lot of content to it, and plus if I did include fighting games, I could probably fill up this list with like 10 different random ass fighting games that I can beat a whole arcade run on, but yeah, I won't do that. But instead, I will briefly mention that very recently I did a stream, and I was playing through a fighting game within the Power Instinct series. It's a series of fighting games that was from Atlus, and they were actually very crazy and over the top, and they're very fun. I actually played through a bunch of them before, but there was one on PS2 I played. It's the 6th installment, and as you can read by the title, I'm not pronouncing that whole damn name. Well, anyways, this was a game that I never played through an arcade run of, and when I did, I can definitely say that the final boss was really fucking hard, and I actually did it, and I'm very proud of myself for that. So, I just wanted to briefly mention that, yeah, I actually beat a game with like a stupidly hard final boss. Maybe not as hard as KOF 11 with fucking Megaki, who sucks a cocky, but damn, it was hard enough as it was. But man, it was very satisfying, and the game is just a hell lot of fun. So yeah, that is one thing I will say, is that if you do want a crazy over-the-top fighting game that will give you a challenge, I do think that is a really good one. So there you have it. That's all the games that I beat on my own for funsies, and yeah, I'd say I'm pretty happy with it. Sure, they may not be like a shitload of games on here, but the amount that I have on here, I am happy that I was actually able to play through. And yeah, even though there was one that was like slightly disappointing, it still wasn't even that bad at all. And even with the games that I reviewed this year, I don't regret playing any of them. Like, yeah, sure, there were some that I played that weren't great, but even then, I at least got something interesting out of it, which is always the most, like, fun part for me personally. So yeah, let's hope that 2024 will bring us some good shit. So as always, thank you for watching and commenting, and have yourselves a great day.
Testicle videos, yeah, testicle videos.